All through part 1, I was pretending that Mirri's miraculous misadventures ended with the Drogo ritual, as though I hadn't read the rest of the book yet. It was easier to start out focusing on Drogo, but now it's time to consider the most magical moment in the series: the birth of dragons. This won't make any sense without watching part 1 first, so make sure you've given that a go before we start. Continuing our analysis of the Dany story, Daenerys smothers Drogo with a pillow to end his suffering, and hers too. Whatever life force was inside Drogo's body is now dead. Dany builds a funeral pyre and, to catch another bird with that stone, burns Mirri alive on it for being a bad friend. She also places the dragon eggs in the pyre, and herself. Time passes, fire happens, and these are the results. Daenerys is miraculously alive, her skin unburnt. Targaryens are famously not fireproof, so clearly something special had to have taken place for this to happen, especially considering Mirri and Drogo are ashes. Drogo was already death, so there's no life force coming or going from him at this point, but Mirri was alive and kicking, and screaming. It should be noted that as the fire burned, Mirri was ululating, just as she was when enacting the first ritual in the tent. This may have something to do with the dragon eggs, previously believed to have literally turned to stone, have hatched. An unprecedented magical event which hasn't occurred in 170 years. Okay, so what the fuck? We have 1 death, sure, but on top of that we have 3 births and 1 super special awesome chocolatey fudge-coated fireproof protagonist who should definitely also be dead. The most common answer to this mystery I see is that Dany was fireproof on her own supernatural volition, and either the fire or that same volition hatched the eggs, and Mirri died screaming and ineffectual. And yeah, that's a valid reading, but let's see if we can make sense of it in a manner consistent with what we've already discussed in part 1. It's going to get technical and honestly a little loopy, but really, what were you expecting? Making the assumption that it should take 1 human death to give life to 1 dragon, we should be seeing 3 deaths lurking here. But there's only 1, Mirri's. That is, unless life force can be stored over time. And I would say that it can. After all, a human body is precisely a vessel for storing life force over time. Now is when we remember the deaths of Drogo's blood riders, and then swiftly forget about them. Sure, 3 deaths yet unaccounted for sound perfect in solving this equation, but if we rope the blood riders in, then we also kind of have to include Quarro, who died at the same time, in the same place, and for the same reason. That's 1 death too many, and on top of that, we've violated the idea that the blood magic is confined to the tent, as Mirri tells us.
You violated the law!
So, not the blood riders. But who else could it be? We've already accounted for, or discounted, all of the deaths in this part of the story. We might have to look elsewhere for our deaths, which sounds like a huge task given the scope of the books. But luckily for us, old Gurmy left us 1 big steamer of a clue. The Dothraki looked at her hatchlings uneasily. The largest of her 3 was shiny black, his scales slashed with streaks of vivid scarlet to match his wings and horns. Khaleesi, Argo murmured. There sits Balerion, come again. It may be as you say, blood of my blood, Dany replied gravely, but he shall have a new name for this new life. I would name them all for those the gods have taken. The green one shall be Rhaegal, for my valiant brother who died on the green banks of the Trident. The cream and gold I call Viserion. Viserys was cruel and weak and frightened, yet he was my brother still. His dragon will do what he could not. And the black beast? Asked Ser Jorah Mormont. The black, she said, is Drogon. In this passage, where both Daenerys and Aggo assert that the dragons are reincarnations in some sense, Dany names the dragons for those she has lost. Note the way she phrases this, those the gods have taken, and how it rings of what Jaqen H'ghar later says about the balance of life and death. So it's kind of spelt out for us. Drogon's life was paid for by Drogo's death. It seems legit. Drogo's corpse was on the same pyre Drogon was birthed on, and Drogo's life force could still be lurking around, given that Mirri was fuckling around with it earlier. So, okay, Drogon's life equals Drogo's death. It's a bit of a mess when paired with what we've already discussed, but let's focus on the dragons for now and sort out the rest later. Rhaegal is associated with Rhaegar, and that's a bit of an issue. Rhaegar died 15 years ago, so barring some time-traveling fetuses, there's no way his life force is anywhere nearby. He was killed by Robert, who was in turn killed by a boar. If Rhaegar's life force is anywhere at this point in time, it's in a river of fecal matter flowing through Flea Bottom. Or he's Mance Rayder, if you're into bath salts. Of course, Rhaegal isn't the only one to be named after Rhaegar. Rhaego's association with Rhaegar is exactly the same as the dragon's, and his life force is 100% lingering at the pyre. Be it that Mirri killed him, or he was legitimately stillborn, or his soul was in Drogo's body and now Dany's, he's here. Although, and make sure you're strapped into your tinfoil hat for this one, Mirri tells us that Rhaegar had been dead for years. And while some absolute champions among the fanbase use this line to propose that Rhaego is actually Joanna Lannister's fetus from 25 years ago, I think it's more possible that Rhaego could, at least symbolically, possess Rhaegar's spirit. So, Viserion. Viserys died quite a while before the dragon's birth. Not a Rhaegar while, but still a while. But it was Drogo who killed him, and very intentionally. So his life force is still here, as his death was never balanced out. So Viserys' soul follows the Dany story, carried around by Drogo's body. Whatever happens to Drogo's life, we can say the same happened to Viserys' life. And if you consider who Drogo, Viserys, and Rhaego all were, it's a bit fitting that they would all find new life in the dragons. Drogo was a warlord, a Khal, a term clearly inspired by the word Khan, which, to simplify to the extreme, is a nomadic cognate for a king.
Nice going, Genghis.
Viserys was a pretender to the Iron Throne and believed himself to be the rightful king, insisting that he is Viserys, third of his name. Rhaego was the son of Khal Drogo and Daenerys, herself a princess holding royal blood, prophesied to be the stallion who mounts the world, the next great Khal who would unite all the Dothraki. I think you can see where I'm going with this. They all have king's blood. And given the prestigious and magical nature of dragons, it would come as no surprise that only the prestigious and magical properties of king's blood could hatch a dragon. And there we have it. Mirri held on to the king's blood life force of Drogo, Rhaego, and Viserys to give life to the dragons. With blood magic, she harvested Drogo's soul from his body, as well as Viserys and Rhaego's soul from Dany's womb. She held onto their souls until the pyre, when she transferred them with fire magic, ululating the same way she did in the tent. Done and done. But nah, we're not done, because as the particularly astute and handsome among you will remember from part 1, the leading idea was that Rhaego's life was given to Drogo in the first ritual, and that his baby brain made him into a vegetable. But whoa, didn't we just say that Mirri held onto Rhaego's soul to birth Rhaegal? Surely only one of these can be true, so let's see if we can iron out that crease. I see two ways to make sense of this. I'll start with the one I find less compelling. Say that Mirri really did transfer Rhaego's force to Drogo's body in the first ritual, and actually didn't take Drogo and Viserys for herself. Of course, Dany then smothers Drogo with intent, thus taking the life force of whoever is in there. So when she goes onto the pyre, she has Drogo, Viserys, and Rhaego there with her. Mirri ululates to transfer their souls to the eggs. Bada bing, bada dragons. Now the issue with that idea is that if Drogo does have himself, Viserys, and Rhaego in there, should he really be in this catatonic state? If we're to believe that the ritual made him this way, then shouldn't he be leaving the tent with less life force and not more? And while the idea of Dany unknowingly killing not only her husband but also her brother and her son is extremely grimdark, it seems more likely that the lives going into the eggs at the pyre are coming from Mirri, as she's been the conduit for everything else of this nature so far. So if we roll with all three King's Blood souls coming from Mirri, there's still that big issue. If not Rhaego's, whose life force went into Drogo's body? The guy's clearly alive after the ritual, so there is some life in him. Now is when we remember the Blood Riders again, and then forget about them for a final time. Because if Drogo's body contained a Blood Rider soul, say that of Kotho, whose life force could have been in the tent by way of Jorah, we run into the same problem. You would probably expect him to, not be a vegetable. So not the Blood Riders. Not all hope is lost though. All we have to do is examine what we know about post-ritual Drogo and see if there's a soul we haven't exactly accounted for that fits the bill. This is everything we know about Drogo after Mirri's shenanigans. He is alive. He doesn't feel the blood flies on him where previously he was quick to kill them. Jorah reckons he likes the warmth of the sun, so it seems like he still has some basic feeling. His eyes follow the sun. He can walk, but never for too long, and only when led. He can eat and drink if you do most of the fucking work for him. Mirri basically says that he'll never be the same, and Dany ends up agreeing. He shows no reaction to all the hot sex stuff Dany does to him. We hear of no struggle when he's being smothered to death. It just so happens that there was a life in the tent that could account for all these things. One that never minded the blood flies, one that would like the sun, one that isn't already going somewhere in our equation, one that would have difficulties adapting to Drogo's body, not being able to walk or eat or drink or fuck. Not a human life, but the horse. Now, back in part 1, I posited that the horse was used by Mirri to initiate the ritual, but no such initiating sacrifice is required for the exchange at the pyre, or in the Harrenhal situation. So no, that isn't the horse's function. If instead the horse's soul goes into Drogo, while Drogo's, Viserys and Rhaego's souls go into Mirri, then everything is set up for the dragons to be birthed as I laid out earlier. But there's still the question of Dany's miraculous survival of the pyre. Again, and I don't know how many more times I can explain this on Facebook comment threads, Targaryens are not fireproof, Daenerys is not fireproof, and her survival here is a freak occurrence. She should be dead. But here she is, alive. Luckily, this one's pretty clear cut. Dany's death was prevented, so the logic we're running with dictates that a life must have been given in her place. There's only one soul at the pyre that we haven't accounted for yet, and it just happens to be the one doing all the magic. Mirri. Although Dany also might have the horse's soul with her, as she smothered Drogo's body, so the horse may have played a role in protecting her. Probably Mirri though. It seems like Mirri died before Dany stepped into the fire, which makes sense to me. With that out of the way, let's do one final account of the entire situation. Firstly, Drogo kills Viserys. Then, a while later, Dany asks Mirri Maz Duur to heal Drogo. Mirri collects the king's blood souls of Drogo, Viserys and Rhaego, and gives Drogo's body the horse soul. Dany kills the Drogo horse, and then we get to the pyre. In the flames, Mirri transfers Drogo, Viserys and Rhaego into the eggs of Drogon, Viserion and Rhaegal, respectively, and lastly gives her own life to protect Daenerys from the flames. And for the first time in hundreds of years, the night comes alive with the music of dragons. So that's my grand super
ultra chocolatey fudge coated mega ultra rare shiny mega super duper.
Okay, I get the picture.
Unified Daenerys blood magic theory. Either all of that happened or it was just like kind of magical, you know? Like Dany did something magical and she survived and lived and stuff, and the fire like birthed the dragons even though it hadn't earlier in the story. And Mirri was just like, yeah, she was just ululating for fun while burning alive, and the dragons' names are just like, well, they're just their names, bro. I won't pretend that this is by any means concrete. Some may even label this as wholesale tinfoil, and if I'm forever known as the guy who thinks that Drogo was a horse, then so be it. So the video is coming to a close, and I'm sure you all have unanswered questions. The concepts of blood magic and life exchange extend a lot further into the story than the initial Mirri rituals and Arya situation. There's still Beric and Thoros and Lady Stoneheart, Stannis and Melisandre and Edric Storm, maybe even Maggie the Frog, Varamir Sixskins, and what lies in the future for Jon Snow. We're far from done with blood magic, and I have plenty more to say, but I thought I'd tie up one more thing before stepping away from the topic for a while. Mirri's motivation. It's probably the biggest argument against everything I've been saying. Why should Mirri birth the dragons? It's a solid question to ask, and that's what I'll be tackling in the next video. But for now, thanks for watching, if you have been.
Bye!
Garbage!
I cannot believe you committed suicide. How could you have done this? How could you have committed suicide?